Jedd Fisch has big plans for Damon Williams.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson, the site editor with Athlon Sports' Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen today, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Just a reminder to everybody out there, no matter where you're getting this, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, anything like that, make sure you click that follow, that subscribe button down below. It really does help us out a lot. And since we're bringing you updates every day throughout the offseason as well, it's the best way to make sure you're up to date with everything going on in the world of UW athletics. We're also on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok at Locked On Huskies. Check us out over there as well. Give us a follow. We got a lot of fun stuff we're putting out on that side of things. But Lars, we got a really fun show coming at all day every day today. We're going to be talking about right before we get into spring practice. They're still a little bit over a month away. We're going to talk about our starting offensive line predictions. We'll get there. We know the everydayers are very concerned about the offensive line, rightfully so. We'll get there. We're talking about what other positions will be the most improved in 2025. But first off, Jedd Fisch went on Brock and Salk a couple of weeks ago, and one thing that he talked about was watching film of a couple different teams. He threw out the Buffalo Bills, the Washington Commanders, the Arizona Cardinals, and the Baltimore Ravens as teams he was watching in terms of trying to figure out ways to utilize Damon Williams better. And I think that's just a really exciting thing to think about in terms of what Damon can be in 2025.
Right. Well, you think about the fact that what Damon showed in 2024 was just kind of a cataclysm of what could be in all facets, where he showed the leg, showed the arm strength, put it all together in the Sun Bowl. Aside from maybe 2 or 3 plays, you're talking about a win there, and that maybe having a little bit more different narrative here. But I think it's not necessarily that anything is going to be drastically different from what Jedd called for Damon in 24 and what he's going to call this fall.
I agree.
But it's just, now you have the full, like, it's Damon's team. He's not a freshman. He's not brand new to this. And I think it just adds a layer of how much it's not necessarily like what can Damon do differently. It's how much can Jedd challenge Damon? Like, what can he put on his plate on top of what he already had as a freshman that says, you know what, we can go 10-2, 11-2 versus 8-4. You took a good step, but you still need to improve before you go into your junior season. I think Jedd, especially with his NFL background and bringing in JP Lossman and those sorts of things, they're really going to push Damon this year. So I think everything that we saw in the Sun Bowl and combined what we saw against UCLA and the whiteout against Penn State, it's all on the table. And so for me, I'm not sure like anything will be drastically different. I think it's just going to be more increased and more like finite.
So I agree with you, but to take it a step further, I also think there's just going to be more. Where that's the most interesting thing about this, in my opinion, where when I watch the Baltimore Ravens, when I watch the Buffalo Bills, there are a lot of design where I know Washington didn't do this a whole ton. Arizona does in spurts at times, but there are a whole lot of designed runs for your quarterback. And that's something that, as Damon were the plan that Jedd told us about in the offseason was the plan was for him to add 10, 12 pounds of muscle over the course of the offseason to help him, survive a year as a starting quarterback and take more hits and survive the Big Ten, really, because that's something that's important for the entire roster. As we saw last year, there was a need to add weight and add strength and add physicality. So that's a big part of this, where I look at it and I say, okay, I see how the Buffalo Bills like to run QB power. That's not where Damon Williams is going to shine, because he's not 6'5", 250. But with the way that Baltimore likes to find ways to get Lamar on the edge and just get him in space and let him be the athlete that he is, Damon can absolutely do the same thing. And it's something you and I talked about on this show when Damon had the read option touchdown against Indiana. He found a way to get one of his best athletes in space and got him into the end zone. And I think we'll see a lot more of that. And the reason I wanted to bring that up is something our good buddy, friend of the show, Alex Katzen, put out on Twitter the other day. And he was talking about Josh McDaniels and the New England Patriots offense. The first season after Tom Brady left the New England Patriots, Lars, starting quarterback was Cam Newton. And Josh McDaniels was still the offensive coordinator, and he had run a certain system for a very long time in New England. And all of a sudden, he had to change things up, and he ran a lot of those same plays where a lot of it was getting Cam just going downhill because he was big, he was physical. With his shoulder the way it was, he wasn't the same athlete that he was 5 years ago when he won MVP. But you found ways to make it work with your quarterback and just put him in advantageous situations. And that's what I'm most interested in when it comes to Demond is we saw what it looks like with his arm. We saw what it looks like with his legs. And now it's a matter of maximizing that and adding more, as you said. And I think that's a really exciting way to do it, is just finding more ways to utilize his legs effectively in terms of design runs and not just read options.
Yeah, in a way, it almost makes, and I know I've made the comparison before to Russell Wilson, where he did have design runs and he did, do certain amounts. But I think on some level, and there's part of it is coach speak and player speak, and then part of it is, well, there's actually some truth to it, where Demond does want to be a quarterback, and it's not the elusiveness. It's more for what we saw against UCLA, where he's able in a split second to evade a pass rush and break out when there's no play there. But ideally, it's more like what you talk about, get him on design rollouts, things where, or going against the grain, even though you don't want to throw back across the field. We know how creative Jedd Fisch can, be with his play calling, using those types of things where the elusiveness of Demond can get outside, and then whether it's a deep shot or, somebody coming across the middle or whatever, or just Demond running in general, you're giving him options. And I think that's the whole point. Yeah. With Will Rogers, this is no shot at Will. We both love Will. But you were limited with the options you had when Will Rogers was your quarterback, because whether it was play calling or Will's ability, to ad lib on the run, he was a good runner, but I don't think obviously nowhere near Demond. And so when you look at what Demond can bring, you don't want to force him into being just a pocket passer, but you also don't want him running like, Johnny Manziel back in the day, where he's taking absurd hits and flying into the air and things like that, because you do at some point, Demond can get bigger, but you still don't want to put him in risky situations, because again, you look at the quarterback situation, aside from Guy Horton, this is Demond's team, and it's a lot different without Demond out there.
So I agree with you, but I don't, and because you're right, where that's, taking it to an extreme a little bit, and it doesn't feel like it's going to get to that level where we saw what it looked like this season, where it's just kind of adding a couple of things like that into your playbook that you can show early on. And then it's something that teams have to prepare for all year long, where it's, add, let's just say 3 to 5 different runs that you can use out of different formations, use however you want, with just finding ways to let Demond be a ball carrier, because that certainly has to be a small part of this, where it's not everything. And it shouldn't be a large portion of it either, because he is such a talented quarterback. But when you have somebody with this level of athleticism, as our buddy Jake Butt said, that Jedd has told him, hey, this is the fastest guy on this team. That's something that you need to find a way to take advantage of, because I'm glad Jedd mentioned the Baltimore Ravens, because the only real comparison you can make in that regard, and it's disrespectful to anybody because you never want to put that kind of, pressure on anybody, but it's Lamar Jackson. 2-time MVP Lamar Jackson, where that's something the Baltimore Ravens have done really well with Lamar throughout his career, is find ways to get him in space and utilize him as a runner. They don't do it a lot. They're, it's 7-8 times a game, which, that will add up. But I don't think it's going to get to that level where, let's be real. If we look up at the end of the game and excluding sacks, Demond has somewhere between, let's just say 4 and 6 carries. I feel like we're going to sit here and say that's a little bit low. So finding ways to utilize his athleticism a little bit more on more reads, on more just different things where, hey, yeah, we are going to, as you said, a design rollout, we are going to get him outside of the pocket. And if first read's not there, second read's not there, just tuck it and go. Don't even worry about trying to come back across your body. Just take off because you can.
And that's fair. Well, I mean, the fact that Demond was the second leading rusher on the team in terms of carries, this past season with 83, obviously, yeah, you don't want to limit him, but I don't know. There's just part of me where, I think it's more because when you have something so special like Demond and somebody who's so dynamic, you want it to be in the moments that matter, not because you can. There's certain times it's like, okay, that's maybe in a moment, it's picking and choosing your battles because you want to be able to, because at that point you will have Demond be able to do both, and teams will have to prepare for both, like you're saying. And so I think it's just a matter of picking your poison, because you don't want to show it too early, you don't want to show it too late. It's a good weapon to have, and it's almost like just seeing how Jedd uses him, which again is the whole point of the segment, but just there's so much potential there. Even something we're not talking about could be on Jedd Fisch's mind, and I think that's what's so intriguing about what Demond brings to the table.
Lars, then we gotta get into it, because there are a couple position groups that could take a big step forward next season. which we'll get to right after a message from our friends over at Prize Picks. March basketball is here, and there's no better way to get in on the action than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With Prize Picks, you pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. It's fast, easy, and keeps every game exciting. I love how I can make my picks in less than 60 seconds and stay engaged all game long, and when I win, my money hits my account in as little as 15 minutes. No waiting around. Prize Picks even offers weekly promos like Taco Tuesday, where you get discounted player projections for even more value. Download the app today and use code LOCKDOWNCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKDOWNCollege for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. Lars, as we were planning this out, we're sitting here talking about what positions we did want to talk about. There's one thing we both said. We said, all right, we're going to talk about the offensive line later on in the show. It's kind of why we scheduled it the way we scheduled the show the way that we did, peek behind the curtain for everybody. So with that being said, what other position groups outside of the offensive line do you think are going to have the show the most improvement in 2025?
So obviously the expectations are kind of unfair given the 3 horsemen that preceded them, but I think wide receiver also has the potential to take a big step. We know what Denzel Boston is, but I still think there's more to him that can come. And I forgot who had the tweet, but it was somebody put out there like, I don't know who wide receiver 4 is, and it's like I put out that I love when I forgot what juice it was, but he was like sipping on that shake that he had in spring camp, and he spent like 2.5 minutes talking about it. That was a great moment where he was kind of sipping. I was like,
yeah.
You're doubting me, so that's what I put out there. But for that reason, where it's like, if Damon can take that next step, that means everybody else around Damon is taking a bigger step. And I think also bringing in Omari, having some Penn State, man, like if he can take the top off the defense opposite of Denzel, everything opens up underneath, and somebody's going to be left open. Whereas Omari, Denzel, Kevin Green, Kate Eldridge, Quentin Moore, Decker DeGrag, all these options start to run through the list. And so for me, you kind of got to start with wide receiver.
So I disagree, not because I like where you're going with that. I think there's only one place to start, and that's defensive line. And that's because that's a group where, first of all, the injury luck that you had at the position last year was awful. Between Javon Parker getting hurt, Zach Durfee, Russell Davis, you had so many guys miss time on that side of the ball, and that's, without even including Armand Parker with a season-ending injury and wasn't able to play snap. So there's a lot that you can say went wrong in terms of health along with depth. Now it feels like you might have both of those things, where I was looking at it, and it's all 5 guys really, where, whether it be defensive tackle, interior guys, or the outside linebackers now, because I included them in this department. And I looked at it and I just said, if Zach Durfee is able to take a big step forward, which feels very possible if he's able to stay healthy, if somebody like Taulealea is able to come in and be disruptive and be a big physical edge-setting force against the run, that is going to be such a big factor for this team because you just didn't have that last season. And I look at the guys you brought in from the portal, whether it be Simone Peppa and Ontario Thompson. I look at guys who could take a step forward in Alinius Davis or Bryce Butler. I think that matters a lot in this because all of a sudden, and like the reason we keep mentioning those guys is, of course, we saw them in spurts last season, not nearly as much as you or I might have expected. But now with another year under their belts, and I want to add Omar Khan to that discussion as well, where all of a sudden, if all of these guys are healthy and all of these guys are playing at let's just call the floor a serviceable level. If you're playing at a serviceable level, that is so much better than what you had last year. And I don't mean that with any disrespect on the guys that played along the 2024 line, but when you have 6, 7, 8 guys that are able to play it at a baseline average level, that is a major improvement from the injuries that you had last season. And then you're able to get after the quarterback a little bit more. You've got more fresh bodies up front, which was the big problem as the season wore on, is you couldn't stop the run because you didn't have fresh bodies and you were getting physically blown off the ball because these guys were just overworked.
Yeah, in a way, it reminds me of the Super Bowl where, like, how did Philadelphia jump out to that big lead? Like, there was nothing up front. Like, there was nothing.
Yeah.
And it makes you think, like, yeah, everybody else can, take the deep shots and do something like that. But I agree. I wanted to give you that one because, the old adage of, like, whichever team wins in the trenches is going to win on Sunday or Saturday. And it's like, breaking news, man. I would have never thought of that analysis, man. You could only get it here. But no, with that being said, you're absolutely right. But I think it's also a matter of how does it pair with Ryan Walters' scheme, like we talked about, the bear front. You talked about the bear front a lot. Where how does it look? What are the different types of pictures that Ryan Walters can show to defenses, and how do you maximize all the guys that are there? Because as you said, like that depth is now the big caveat where, not to give anybody PTSD, but PEMDAS, in parentheses here, the big caveat here, the big caveat being injury here. We're like, if healthy, this is a significantly more improved depth. You have a lot more depth along the defensive line and outside linebacker as well. Because if Zach Durfee can stay healthy, you're talking about maybe 5.5 plus sacks. Taulealea, and we've seen what he can do pressuring the pocket from the inside and the outside. And Terrio Thompson, can he emerge as a guy in the Big Ten again after making a previous cup of coffee stop at Iowa, where I know I'm sure when you talk to him, he kind of expressed I didn't get to do everything that I wanted to do at Iowa, and he doesn't put that on the coaching side. He doesn't speak ill. He's like, look, it was a good opportunity for me. It was a good learning opportunity, but now it's like I know I can get back to that level. Now I need to prove that I can do it. Same thing with Logan Tagapalu, where we talked about it last year, where I thought he would have more of an impact. Now he kind of has that MJ Ollie mold on him, where it's okay. Year 2, MJ really took a step. Can Logan take that similar step? Right. If you have all that, the other guys that it makes life a lot easier for. And it's not necessarily like improvement in terms of that they were horrible last season because Camp Fab was great, but I think also the safeties, kind of that next.
Oh, that was my next one too. I like this.
Where it's like you have a lot of Raheem Wright, Rashawn Clark. I know you want to call him a nickel, but we can call him a hybrid or whatever you want to do. There's so much young talent at that safety position. That's why bringing in Alex McLaughlin and CJ Christian was so important. But those two aren't going to be the only ones. Mikkel obviously being the veteran of the group there as well. I almost wonder, does Mikkel fall into the Cam Davis role, where it's, hey, we're coming into Mikkel's room, but Mikkel doesn't end up being the guy. But with that being said, I think it's a good problem to have because there's so much young talent. Like, who in that room is going to step up and emerge? So it's not like improved from a bad angle. It's more or less who's going to step up and make that improvement.
Yeah, so I like where you're going with that because one big part of this is something you mentioned Ryan Walters a minute or two ago, where we talked about how impactful safeties are in run defense and just helping in his scheme. So that's something that I think is going to be really important. And whoever it is, where I think Mikkel is going to play a big role this year because I like to look back on his Indiana game and say that was the moment where he really showed what he could be. And he was acting as a third safety for a lot of last year behind Cam Fab, behind Cam Broussard. So now he has an opportunity to step up and, just play a much bigger role where with Alex McLaughlin and CJ Christian, you can find a way to make that work with 3 safeties on the back end if you want. I do consider Rashawn Clark a nickel, but he is a safety. And that's what he will be. With Raheem Wright, we certainly expect him to take a big jump forward. And then Rylan Dillard-Allen is somebody who I don't know what that's going to look like this season, just in terms of adding weight is going to be really important for him. So maybe it will take him a year or two, but you look at the room this season and having just so many experienced guys at the top of that room, you don't need him to play more than 4 games. If he fights his way onto the field and we get out to practice and we see him just flashing each and every day, great. That's fine. That's a good problem to have. Having more talent is not a bad thing. So that's one thing where I'm really interested to see what that's going to look like because you have a lot of talented bodies there. And that was the one where when we started talking about this, that was one that I circled and I said, I think this one might end up being the most improved just because I think it really can go from solid play to really, really impactful this season.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes the addition of Taylor Mays and the promotion of John Richardson so intriguing is now you have 3 defensive back coaches on your staff, if you think about it, with Ryan Walters, Richardson, and then Taylor Mays. And so there's so much coaching potential there. And we've seen what John Richardson can do at Arizona and even last season at Washington with Thaddeus Dixon. Like Thaddeus probably was one of the most improved players on Washington last season, not to bring up a sour name there, but I think it's also why Ephesians Prysock can, take a next step and, kind of everybody in the secondary in general, but specifically from the safety, because we're both high on those guys. But I think how everything ends up pairing together is going to be really intriguing. Like, what happens to Leroy Bryant? What happens to a lot of these younger guys where there's so much youth there, but then you have Dyson McCutcheon and you have Rayshon. So it's like there's so much that I'm really going to be looking in spring camp because that first week and a half of spring camp is going to be very telling because that's halfway before the portal opens. And then you're talking about, okay, now when the portal window opens, is anybody maybe who's not getting their playing time want to dip out? And I think it's going to be hard for those guys to want to leave when you have 3 coaches who can get you to such a high level.
No, absolutely. And one other position I wanted to talk about, and just I feel that it's fair to just say this for a second or two is I think tight end is going to take a big step forward also, but like defensive line to an extent where the defensive line was certainly a little bit more highlighted because of the way the season played out, but it's a little bit more because of injuries than it was the actual play at the position, where I think Kaleki Latu and Decker DeGraff both did a phenomenal job last year. But that was one where, before I move on to the offensive line, it deserved to mention that having two healthy bodies, we've talked about it a lot, that's going to change, and that's going to be much better. And we're going to see them utilized a lot differently because of it. And I think we're going to just have very, very different expectations for just the guys that are out there on the field in 2025. But Lars, this offensive line has certainly needed to improve, and we think it's going to do that. But let's jump into what our starting five looks like right now. Whew, all right. Do you want to go position by position here, or should we just each give our starting five and then just dive into it after that?
Well, I have to imagine it's going to be pretty similar, so we should probably just go left to right.
Right. That works. Yeah. Do you want to just kick us off with your starting five?
Yeah, so I mean, at this point, again, it's going to be a conservative estimate where the only one that I have a really tricky one is going to be the opposite. We'll see in a second here. So I'm going to go left tackle Carver Willis, the easy transition, where I think, when we talked to him in early February, he said that he had been working at left tackle. That's kind of where he had been, not told he was going to play, because he said he doesn't matter. And Michael Switzer didn't say guarantee left tackle or guarantee right tackle because you have Drew Party coming back. But I think at the end of the day, Carver, his experience being a sixth-year guy, he's going to win out of left tackle. Left guard, part of me wants to, in a weird way, say Pocky, but I'm going to end up putting Geirean Hatchett there going into spring camp for now, just kind of hedging my bet there. Landon, center, obviously next brother combo, just the hand running on the wall there. And then Pocky at right guard. And I'm going to give – this is tough for me because I did see Max McCree getting a couple of snaps last season at right tackle and warm-ups and things like that towards the end of the season. I'm intrigued to see where he ends up fitting in and all this. I think he might get the edge over Drew as a party, but I'm not – it's not for a lack of – I don't think Drew can improve because, again, we kind of held off last segment talking about the offensive line for this reason because, as we joked about before the show, it's like, well – no offense to those guys, but it couldn't get much worse than last year. I mean, 2021 was pretty worse. But, aside from that, it can't get much worse than that. And I think, if Drew can make that step, but then what happens to Max McCree? Somebody's going to be either an odd man out or somebody's going to have to shift inside. And I know you kind of are a proponent on somebody shifting inside potentially. So I'll kind of leave that to you to discuss.
So I actually don't have that in this starting five, but it does look a little different. So as of right now, I have Maximus McCree at left tackle just because we've seen him there. We know what that looks like. We know he's worked in practice with Damon before. So if that's what it ends up being as of right now, and we get out there for the first day of spring camp, not going to be shocked. Left guard, yeah, I've got Geirean Hatchett there right now. Center, Landon Hatchett, easy, as you said. Right guard, I wanted to go with Pocky here, but just for the sake of being a little bit different, to give us a little bit more to talk about, I'm going to go with Zach Henning for the time being. And then right tackle is where I'm going to put Carver Willis for this period of time. And let's stick there in this Pocky Zach Henning debate, because it's something we've gotten a whole lot of questions about. We know what Jedd's position is after his last press conference, where he said, yeah, we're not looking to add anybody else right now. We're happy with where we are on the offensive line. And so that just kind of leaves us with something that we talked about a month ago. And that's, all right, it's going to be Pocky versus Zach Henning for whichever guard spot that is not occupied by Geirean Hatchett, whether that's left guard, whether that's right guard. And, we know what both these guys have been. We know they're really, really high on both these guys. I want to give the edge to Pocky Finau right now because he played so well in the Sun Bowl. You go back and you watch the tape, he played really well. He looked like he certainly belonged physically. And now with 3-4 more months to continue to add strength and add weight to his frame, if he's able to come out here during spring practice, I think he's going to be somebody who can certainly grab hold of that spot. I just wanted to give it to Zach Henning because I feel that you can say that where we saw him at a whole bunch of different points this season as a sixth offensive lineman. And now, because where we've seen him at guard, we've seen him at tackle, both coaching staffs really seem to like him. The question was just always finding a spot for him. And I think he has an opportunity to really win that out this spring.
No, I like that. I think I got a hot take for you here. So I think I can see both Pocky and Zach Henning starting at guard. And I say
I
that
can see that, yeah.
with a caveat of, and no disrespect to Geirean, almost how, if you look at how Enoch Umahi was used towards the end of last season, where he played right guard, left guard, and he played a third position. I don't think he didn't play center. I think it was right tackle. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but it was like a handful of snaps.
It was one of the tackle spots, yeah.
And so for that reason, I think, Geirean in his sixth season of eligibility here, but I'm losing track already. But the point being that I don't think Geirean necessarily was coming back home to Washington and say, okay, I have to be a starter. Like, again, if he ends up being a starter and ends up even all honorable mention or third team all Big Ten, like, so be it. Like that's a good problem to have. That means, but the way that kind of the rotation looked towards the end of last season, also with D'Angelo and Landon at center, where you want the experienced guy just in case the guy behind him isn't exactly ready yet. But I think at the same point, I could easily see Henning starting at right guard at, by mid-October and Pocky at left guard, and Geirean kind of still playing, 20-ish snaps, either bouncing and doing as a sixth offensive lineman or doing a number of different things, because he's shown that position versatility throughout his career in college. He hasn't necessarily stayed healthy his entire time in college, but I don't think that matters now because you're looking at him as a veteran presence and more or less serving as like not just a warm body, but a guy that can challenge the young guys, but also not hold them back at the same point. Like, you're not going to be forced to play Geirean over Henning or Pocky, where, hey, if either of those two guys are going to make it close, we know Jedd might play the younger guys and say, hey, okay, we'll give Geirean a couple of series and we'll give Pocky a couple, and we'll just let you guys earn it on the field. I could easily see that being the case in the early, first 2-3 weeks in September.
So I love everything you just said. This just hit me in the middle while you're talking, because we wanted to find a way to work one or two of the freshmen into this conversation where we don't think they're going to start, but we wanted to make sure that we talked about where they could be in terms of finding just fitting in amongst the depth. So Lars, my question to you is, where does Champ Taulealea fit into this conversation? Because I think this is somebody where I wouldn't be surprised if one offensive lineman does not redshirt this year and just finds his way into a bunch of games, some at the end of blowouts, some maybe as a rotational guy, whatever it might be. But for me, that guy would be Champ, because if he's on the depth chart come August, I'm not going to be surprised. If just because of his size and his physicality and what he is right now on day one as an interior lineman, I wouldn't be surprised, but I'm curious to get your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, part of me wants to say John Mills just for the effect of just like,
I respect that. Yeah.
I want to see what he could do, just like, because again, if he's in that 6th, 7th offensive lineman mold, like, you're just asking him to road grade the heck out of somebody. And I'm not gonna lie, when you did say Champ, it made me think back to that John Cena meme way back when. It's like, is Champ there? But anyways, no. But that being said, like, that's the one that's really difficult, because I remember we both saw him leaving the stadium about a month ago, and it's like, he's an absolute unit. So it's hard to, like, you just look at him and it's like, okay, physically he checks all the boxes, and as long as when we see, but again, for as many guys as we could think, man, when he the first guy off the bus, like, okay, like, yeah, absolutely. But then you're like, it's not exactly the same. I don't want to make it the same. But Elijah Jaquette, who's the left tackle from last season, not Kaylee Tafai, Swan Fasolo, where you have two big body guys, but they don't necessarily they haven't put it together physically. Can you use your body at the college level, especially at the Big Ten level? It's one thing in the Pac-12 where it's finesse, you can be a little bit more undersized and get away with that. In the Big Ten, you absolutely cannot. Like, and Washington found that out this season, which is why you go and get a Champ Taulealea, because he physically can step right in, similar with Pocky. I don't think Zach heading in the same light as redshirt freshman will be able to do that. But I just think, I would agree that probably he'll get – I mean, I put the over-under at 6.5. What are you taking?
For games played?
Yeah, for Champ. Yeah, games played.
Yeah, I'd take the over in that regard, where I think there are ways to work him in a whole bunch of different spots. But on top of that, it's just Jedd's willingness to play young guys. And it's almost like there's almost a certain extent where it's just hey, look, we played one of our freshmen along the offensive line for 9 games, because that's something I could see him just already hear him saying in a December press conference. We're really excited about that. We're excited about what that could be moving forward. I'm not going to get it all my coach speak, because I could do that for like 10 straight minutes. But I think that's an important conversation to have as part of this, because when you look at tackle, it is somewhat set, where Sawane still has some development to do. Elijah Jaquette still has some developing to do. It looks like you could say the same about Justin Hilkema and David Boyachian in terms of where they are right now. So with that being said, tackle it's first of all, it's great to have that kind of depth. That just hit me where, oh yeah, that was not a conversation we were able to have last season. It's, whoa, there are 5 or 6 tackles that are not true freshmen. This is kind of nice. But on top of that, it's all right. We understand that Carver Willis is going to take one of these 2 spots. My personal thought on putting him at right tackle is why, like, yeah, he's played left tackle before, but why would you take him away from a position that he's been really comfortable at for the last 2 years? If he's good at left tackle, great, no argument for me. But why not keep him on the side that he's stronger at and then let Maximus McCree, who looked pretty good over there last season before he got hurt, and now with some more time to actually, be physically acclimated to football, be in the weight room, all of that is just going to do nothing but help him long term, and giving him a little bit more time where, spring practice is a lot of time to work out with the first team and have an opportunity to just win that job outright is huge, because then, all of a sudden we're talking about more depth. If you want to move Drew Party back inside and you think, hey, Paki Finau or Zach Henning, whoever might not be ready just yet, we can have Drew there. And if there's an injury, we can find a way to move things around, or because we think these guys are all really good, we can keep rotating bodies and keep guys fresh. There's so many different options now, which I think is just, as I keep talking this out here, my biggest takeaway from all of this is I feel way more comfortable at the offensive line right now compared to last season.
I agree. And I think the interesting thing is going to be who ends up, like, how do you manage that? How do you figure out how to keep everybody in that room? Because I have a hard time envisioning that room staying intact through the spring portal period.
I agree.
I'm not saying the starting offensive line guys. I'm just saying, like, if you're looking at that position, thinking, hey, like, how do you keep all these guys happy? Because then you talk about all the freshmen that you got to play too, like, not play, but like that you have to continue to develop and things like that. And so it'll be interesting to see how it all ends up panning out. But again, it's like you said, it's a much better problem to have than last season, which was, well, we're going to only have 2 series of offensive linemen, and we're really not even going to do like 11 on 11 because we only got 5 bodies up front. So we're not going to ask them to go back and forth for 2 drives in a row. And then again, that impacts the quality of your practices. So it's going to be better quality practices. It's just a matter of how can you make everybody happy.
Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all of you for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please, if it's 5-star reviews, it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Wednesday.